are your ancestors? I'd like to tell you a little bit about mine. As a Black American woman, a descendant of the men and women who were enslaved, I am the legacy of those who were brought over in the most brutal way via the Middle Passage. I know that in school, you may have been taught that slaves were dropped off in the Americas, but I'd like to remind you of something, that it was indeed scientists, storytellers, grandmothers, composers, and more of the like who were taken from their homelands. And it was the strength and the self-dignity and the solid glory that held their bones together and kept the breath inside of them as they were hauled like cattle to work the fields and build the fortune of this country. I'm giving this talk from a stage in Bend, Oregon, where the racial makeup is 92% white, according to the 2018 census. So that means that there's a good chance that those in this audience identify as part of that white community. So I want to ask you again, who are your ancestors? As someone here in America, there's a good chance, especially for those with white skin and white privilege that comes with it, there's a possibility that your lineage was part of the white slave-owning families here in the US. But there's also the chance that they weren't. Perhaps you're just a white person. Existing in this country that was literally built on the foundation of racism. One in which Black bodies were considered just 3/5 of a citizen, a country that made entire laws where Black people couldn't swim in the same pools, couldn't drink from the same fountains, couldn't buy property in the same neighborhoods as their white counterparts. A country whose scientists even went so far as to conclude that Black bodies simply didn't feel pain in the same ways that whites did to justify the poor treatment of the bodies of Black women, men, and children in the medical and judicial fields. I highly encourage you to Google Dr. Sims. All of these realities of what it means to be embodied in Black skin has quite a lot to do what it means for you to be embodied in white skin. The work I do as an academic, writer, lecturer, and activist is centered at looking at the intersection of my Blackness and my womanhood. Two things that I certainly didn't choose, but they're two things that affect how I maneuver through the world every day. My social media audience of over 200,000 consists mostly of white women who I bring into conversation about their role in white supremacy. It's been a continuous conversation for some time now, exploring the pill that white women have to swallow, that they indeed hold the position as both part of the oppressed as far as their gender, but also part of the oppressor as part of their race. I often get messages of angst from my white audience. They say to me, "But I didn't own slaves. Why do I have to be held accountable for the complications of race today?" I hear this question, and what I do is try to hold up a mirror that can reflect both of our positions in a 21st century aftermath of the horrors of centuries of a slave trade that came before both of us. And I explain, yes, and I wasn't a slave, but daily I'm existing under the effects of what the white community did to Black people that it brought over here. What they did to set up a system in which white skin holds privileges and Black skin holds consequences. And then I continue, until Black people no longer have to deal with the consequences of what our ancestors had to go through, I will continue calling for accountability to white people who are still resting in the benefits of a racist system that was set up for them. As a white person, though you were not there to sell Black bodies, you are living with an unearned privilege, one that was inherited simply because it was built into this country's fabric. And it's still there. You're still benefiting from it. And unless you are actively part of turning this country into one that is anti-racist, then you're comfortably resting on that privilege, whether you're aware of it or not. I often get gasps of dissent when I mention the word white supremacy. I wrote a piece for Harper's Bazaar titled "White Feminism is White Supremacy in Heels." In writing that piece and reading the responses, if you've ever seen my comment section, you know what I mean, I quickly realized that there was a cognitive dissonance that the white community had separating itself from the roots and the fruits of racism, even though it's still very evident to the Black community. But for those whom racism doesn't directly affect, it gets pushed into the rhetoric of a post-racial society. Racism is always taught to us as a thing of the past, that there were a small group of scraggly white men who lynched a few Black men just because they happened to be mean people. In reality, at its height, the KKK had a countrywide membership of 6 million and had lynched 3,500 people in an 86-year time frame. As recent as 1931, white communities in Missouri were still gathering in numbers as high as 4,000 to watch the lynching of Raymond Gunn. At least a quarter of those in attendance were women, and there were hundreds of children there as well. As terrifying as those historical statistics are, there are also very modern manifestations of that violence and oppression. The harm has shifted from blatant lynching and has oozed into microaggressions, legal loopholes, and social norms that affect the Black communities, large and small. Daily damaging effects to the livelihood and psyche of so many in our community. There are white tears, the many cases we see across the internet of white women using the police as their personal customer service line to remove Black people from their spaces, like Allison Edel of San Francisco, who saw a little Black girl selling water on the sidewalk in the summer, like most little girls do. Have you ever heard of a lemonade stand? And Allison decided to call the police to report a 6-year-old seller without a permit. In 2014, Forbes did a write-up on a report which analyzed the data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics that revealed that African Americans with college degrees are as likely to get hired as whites who have dropped out of high school. There are the continued laws that snake around direct racism, but still disproportionately put Black communities at risk through loopholes like seen in the 13th Amendment. It's celebrated as would abolish slavery, but if you read the not so fine print, it says, except as a punishment for crime. There's a continued unlawful imprisonment of Black men and women, some 40%, whom will spend time in prison or jail or on probation, resulting in a total today that is higher than the number of Blacks enslaved in 1850. Angela Davis said the words, "It isn't enough to not be racist. You have to be actively anti-racist." What that means for those existing with white privilege is that unless you are intentionally aware of and combating the racism going on in your communities, on your campuses, in your homes, then you are part of the continued harm of Black bodies, Black communities, like the small percentage here in Bend, and Black livelihoods. Showing up often means not standing for racism anytime, anywhere. It's high time that we all be committed to creating environments where racists are the ones who are uncomfortable. There must be agitation within the communities and systems that you're an insider, using your privilege as a white person to influence other white people, holding each other accountable. Being anti-racist means engaging your voice to push for change where you live and work. Consider the ways that you vote and show up politically. For example, white women were big factors in getting Trump into office. 53% of white women who stepped into the voting booths said, "We want him as our president." That was a grand showcasing of what I call when white women choose their whiteness over their womanhood. When white women make decisions that keep them in their power and the safety of their whiteness, even when they're well aware that the decision is hurting other women that they claim to be in sisterhood with. We need more restorative action, such as the law in San Francisco that expunged the records of thousands of marijuana convictions. Black men were being jailed in grand disproportion, affecting the realities of thousands of Black families for using and selling marijuana, only for us now to see the white community making millions, while those men still sit in cells, losing employment opportunities, voting rights, and life experiences. Lastly, we need to be more honest about the history of this country. On an individual level, you need to read and understand the true experiences and the voices of the Black community. Because when we rid ourselves of the whitewashed histories, we can be honest about how far we've yet to come and how much work needs to truly be done. For example, the feminist movement often retells its story as an effort of benefiting all women, despite pervasive racism. Crusader for women's suffrage and founder of the League of Women Voters, Carrie Chapman Catt notably once said, "White supremacy will be strengthened, not weakened, if you give us the right to vote." We saw that that's still going on today. To remember history accurately and to retell it, the feminist movement today cannot gloss over its racist history, but it must instead name and deal with its foundational racism. I am often asked by white people, well, what do I do? I've learned that race often becomes rocket science. And instead of using the same Google that they use to answer any other question they've ever had, they depend heavily on the people of color around them to expend the emotional and intellectual labor to explain our existence, to prove our pain, and to offer step-by-step instructions on how to demand that our lives matter. I've come up with my own personal equation for what it really means to be an ally. Knowledge plus empathy plus action. It's these three things that you must bring together in order to truly show up in solidarity. Taking out any part of that equation lends to either the ego or to performance. Both of those, there is no room for when lives are on the line. And then, of course, action. Showing up day in and day out, deciding not to settle in the safety of just being not racist, but being intentionally and passionately against the racism that is perpetuated in our country in tiny and large ways. At work, in your homes, in your churches, in your government, within yourself. We must show up, all of us, every day. Thank you.